You're watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and our special coverage of the Biden administration taking over.
Mr. President.
I, Kamala Harris, do solemnly swear.
Joining me is the StratNews Global editor, Surya Gangadharan. Quite a spectacular show. Surya, I think I heard that you got off Netflix and you were watching the whole thing.
You bet. I saw the whole show from beginning to end. And the thing that struck me is, unlike, say, the Indian swearing in, which tends to be within the confines of Rashtrapati Bhavan, this is a public event, for the people of America to celebrate. And that's what struck me, I mean, it has a mix of everything, there's a benediction, there's a prayer, there's some entertainment, J-Lo, I mean, Lady Gaga, you have it all.
And we're going to have also you seeing swearing in of the 46th President of the United States and the 49th Vice President of the United States. We're going to have comments on expertise of the former Foreign Secretary Nirupana Rao, and we also spoke to Richard Rossow on what we should be expecting in the days, hours, and weeks ahead. One of the first leaders to congratulate the Biden administration, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, was Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, who tweeted, apart from leaders across the world who had also done that, my warmest congratulations. He talked about his best wishes for a successful term in leading the U.S. Surya, it was down to business from day one. And if you remember that Nike ad, we had just do it. I mean, their tagline is just undo it. 15 executive orders, right? On the first day.
Yeah, I think in a sense that also underscores the perhaps the challenges he faces, I mean, there is so much to undo, and also a sense that perhaps Trump's legacy is going to haunt Biden perhaps as he goes forward, and whether, I mean, look at the divisions within America, the polarization, and the strange fact is that Biden never talked about foreign policy in his address. It was all about healing America, unifying divisions, talking about the storming of Capitol Hill. So there are challenges ahead, and one is not very sure how smooth it's going to be in the days ahead.
And that's exactly, in fact, what Surya asked former Foreign Secretary Nirupana Rao in terms of the assessment around the world, and especially in India, that domestic policy would be the main focus of the Biden administration, and whether foreign policy and ties with India would get affected.
The policymakers in India should not lose sleep over the fact that there is going to be a change in administration, and Mr. Biden could bring a fresh set of priorities to this relationship. I don't believe he will. Essentially, there is a metabolism about this relationship that is very stable and very positive, and that embraces, as the outgoing U.S. ambassador said, every field of human endeavor, essentially. When it comes to the priorities that Mr. Biden is likely to have, you have to understand that the United States today, and what you've seen in the wake of the election results and the drama and the very tragic drama and unfolding of events in the U.S. Capitol on the 6th of January, all this goes to show that America is a deeply polarized society today. There are deep, deep divisions and chasms within the country. And any incoming president, leave alone Mr. Biden, has a lot on his plate. He will have to focus on the domestic agenda, the domestic priorities, and the crisis that stares him in the face front and center is the COVID crisis,
Yeah.
the number of deaths that have been so high within the United States, so unusual and so different from what one would assume for a developed country like the United States, a world leader in so many fields. So he will have to focus on that, the vaccine rollout, bringing down the death toll, uh, just healing the country in so many ways, looking at the unemployment figures, looking at the way people have suffered, have hurt essentially in these times, and also, fact that Mr. Trump was there to begin with was symptomatic of the problems within American society. Something has gone wrong there, and it needs to be fixed. It needs to be sorted out. And Mr. Biden has his job cut out for him in that sense.
Biden has his work cut out for him. He's already got down to work. In fact, one of our viewers has a comment to say, Arjun Surya Kumar, who says Biden and Obama, both their administrations, were never friendly to India, unlike Trump's administration. He is your favorite president, right, Surya? Because he'd always give you a headline early in the morning when we had our editorial calls.
Well, Obama, I'm not sure.
Trump, I mean.
Sorry?
I said Trump was your favorite president.
Well, if you look at the way in which he was backing India in terms of China, and the fact that he was very cracking down on Pakistan, very, very hard on its terrorism and squeezing it in the FATF. These are, positive indications from us who've dealt in the foreign policy area for so long. But yes, I think he fixed us on trade. I think part of the blame also lies with us because we've been perhaps more intent on protecting our market, trying to get our industry back on its feet. So we had our issues too. But to that extent, I think a bit of a balance with Trump there was. But yes, in terms of foreign policy, perhaps he was more forthright with us.
You're talking about trade, and I spoke to Richard Rossow, the senior fellow and the Wadhwani Chair at CSIS, Center for Security and International Studies, and asked him specifically this, because I remember maybe almost a year back when our Commerce Minister said that limited trade deal was just a couple of phone calls away, and we're already a year down. This is what Mr. Rossow had to say about India-U.S. trade ties.
Well, we're going to start off on a very difficult footing in terms of U.S.-India trade relations. I think a lot of the grievances in the past, they continue to mount. Frankly, even if we did come together on the elements of this mini trade agreement that the two sides cobbled together but weren't able to complete, it's going to be fairly irrelevant because the list of grievances on both sides has expanded quite a bit, even since those elements of the agreement were first, concretized. So I think the pressures and the fights are going to continue. I think as both of our countries look for a way to pull ourselves out of a COVID-induced economic tailspin, the idea about opening up our markets and having our manufacturers compete more directly with global manufacturers, it's not going to be very politically palatable in either of our countries. So I think initially, I think you're going to see less over tension, less of these kind of acute mentions by the president about India and Harleys and things like that. So I think the acute pressures will be reduced. But the underlying pressures driven by these measures that have actually blocked the market on both sides are going to be maintained, at least initially. It's a question about whether in year 2, year 3, year 4 of the Biden administration, will India become less protectionist? We're going to find out, with this budget, and as we do in every year's budget, are you going to see customs duties go up or down or not move at all? Will the United States restore GSP benefits? These are things that I think are probably going to have to be more vibrant conversations a little bit further down the road. I think initially, let's just put a pause on the fight. Hopefully we can get this mini trade agreement done. And then I think years 2, 3, and 4 is when we'll get some more positive things on the table. The one area where we may see early progress, though, is on immigration. At the end of the day, we can talk about make in India, make America, whatever, but our IT services trade remains the bedrock of U.S.-India commercial relations. It doesn't get nearly enough attention, but when you think about most commercial engagement that happens right now, the bulk of U.S. investments, the number of American badged employees in India, the number of Indian badged employees in the United States, IT services trade drives it in a substantive way. And when you talk about things like immigration restrictions, that puts a real pinch in terms of how the trade flows actually work. So if you see the Biden administration begin to walk back, at least from these immigration restrictions that they've been talking about, that's one thing that's going to be pretty useful. So that's the area I think we're going to get some early relief. Other areas in terms of goods trade barriers, I think that's going to have to be parked for a little while.
So your early relief, possibly on immigration, trade further down the road, Mr. Rossow says. But you also spoke to Ambassador Rao about another big focus around the world over the last year, and which is going to continue, which is China, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I think the concern in India is whether the Biden administration is going to be as forthcoming in its diplomatic support for India as the Trump administration has. Now, nobody expects the U.S. to come and fight our battles for us, but certainly we expect some kind of diplomatic support, military support, which the Trump administration was very, very forthcoming about. So is the Biden administration going to be in the same kind of space, same support? This is what I asked Ambassador Rao.
The importance, the diplomatic, the economic, the political importance of the relationship with India is actually highlighted in the document. Vis-a-vis, of course, the need to control and to check and to compete and to confront China, on the other hand. So India is one of the countries which has received, I think, a lot of attention, and whose importance for the region and whose importance for the United States has, in fact, been highlighted in the document. So I wouldn't say that it causes issues for the future of the India relationship. And maybe, of course, Mr. Biden doesn't need to follow this document, letter for letter. But I think I was listening to Mr. Kurt Campbell, who's become the Asian czar for Biden, in a sense, the czar for dealing with relations with Asian countries. He has also emphasized the importance of India and the importance of understanding India more deeply in the United States, and to take the relationship forward. And as far as the relationship with China is concerned, yes, you may have perhaps a more sober and a more reasoned approach to China. I don't visualize President Biden or Secretary of State designate Blinken referring to China as just the CCP, as Mr. Pompeo did. It may be less ideological, but I think the competition and the fact that, the rise of China is casting long shadows on the prospects for America in this region, I think will consume this new administration just as much as it did the Trump administration.
More reasoned relationship in terms of China, Pakistan now, I mean, in terms of the U.S., reasoned. Biden was in the sit room when Osama bin Laden was taken out in Operation Geronimo. He knows Pakistan in and out. Yet there has been a little bit of concern by what the Defense Secretary General Austin has said in his nomination hearing, Surya.
I think there is, if you've gone through Austin's comments, actually they're not very different from what the previous administrations had said. It's a few lines. It's not any great detail. They have referred to the fact that Pakistan is important for the transition in Afghanistan. And in that sense, the US will have to play ball. I mean, if you look back at the Trump administration, in the last year or so, he's been fairly, he's held back on Pakistan, although he's been fairly clear that they have to shape up their act. And in that sense, the pressure at the FATF.
In fact, one of our viewers, Krish Vikram, says the Biden Secretary of Defense has already made a statement saying the U.S. will resume military ties with Pakistan. They were cut off in 2019, I think, by Trump. And that certainly shows India's place in the Biden administration. And that's a question, again, I posed to Mr. Rossow in terms of when India holds center stage in the Indo-Pacific strategy of the U.S., what about Pakistan when it comes to the AFPAC region?
Yeah, the partnership with Pakistan, if you could even call it that, is extremely narrow. And I think sometimes, from India's view, we're there's such a focus on Pakistan, there's a lot of overamplification when we do say something that is somewhat positive when we talk about a relationship with Pakistan. But it's so very narrow. It's about the future of Afghanistan and the fact that American troops are on the ground. And, as you sort of hinted at, we do very much view that the future of Afghanistan's stability, Pakistan has a role to play in that. But, comparing the relationship with Pakistan and India, starting about 20 years ago, started to head into absolutely different trajectories. I mean, with India, we talk about civilian nuclear cooperation. We talk about tearing down any barriers we've got on the export of our most advanced military technologies, the kind of exercises and partnership. And that's not even to say all the work that we do with India on development, our foreign investors, the trade relationship. So certainly there is a narrow thread where we want to maintain connectivity with Pakistan, but it's, for a very utilitarian purpose, I think. We would love to see, Pakistan sort of change course, to abandon the proxy of terrorism, to abandon these growing linkages with China. And so, we hope remains eternal as well that Pakistan will take some different choices in those regards. But in terms of actual concrete collaboration, it's very narrow, but it is important.
If wishes would be horses, Amir Wadhwani points out, as long as the Biden administration doesn't go hand in hand with the jihadis, everything will be fine. But again, when it's coming to the region, concerns in New Delhi about how the Biden administration, especially because of how team members have reacted in the past, Surya, to issues that India considers internal to its politics, whether it's Jammu and Kashmir, whether it's the other issues.
I think Kashmir, human rights, these have always been those areas where we tend to get a little prickly, and we don't appreciate other governments telling us to get our act together or do this or do that. And this goes back a long way, I think, to the 90s and the 80s, when there was so much pressure on India to, do this and that on Kashmir. They were playing games with us, diplomatic games, giving Pakistan a kind of a leg up in that sense. So some of those prickliness continues, but as Ambassador Rao mentioned, this is something that we shouldn't be too concerned about or too worried about.
There has been a past record when it comes to people within the Biden administration, even Ms. Kamala Harris herself, about issues like Kashmir. But I think the overarching importance and the strategic value of the relationship with India will take a paramount position when it comes to how the Biden administration tackles these subjects, as it were. So I don't believe these will become obstacles as far as the transaction and as far as the conduct of the relationship is concerned. If at all concerns are expressed, and they may very well be, it will be, away from the public space, away from the public arena. They will refrain from making public pronouncements on these issues. They will perhaps talk about it behind closed doors. And I think between democracies such as ours, that kind of a free and fair and frank exchange of views really doesn't take away from the strength or the health of the relationship.
Behind closed doors on prickly issues, but something that wasn't behind closed doors in the Trump administration, Surya, was especially ex-Secretary of State now, Mike Pompeo, and the Indo-Pacific in the last minute declassification of the 2-year-old strategy.
In fact, that was the document which Ambassador Rao was mentioning a little while ago, the declassification of a fairly recent document, And of course, the Trump administration had its concerns and its compulsions, so they went ahead and did that. Not that any of us could disagree with some of the things that mentioned there, but of course, the sense also remains that will the U.S. continue to be as strong in its commitment to the Indo-Pacific as the Trump administration was. And this is something that I put to Ambassador Rao.
The Indo-Pacific strategy of the government, the Trump administration, was declassified recently, and which is highly unusual just for a 2-year-old document to have been declassified in that fashion. So yes, I mean the measures he's announced vis-a-vis China, the talk of what the U.S. should do vis-a-vis Taiwan. The Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, has not relented as far as his travels are concerned in order to make pronouncements about Trump policy here, there, and everywhere. So yes, in that sense, I think he has tried to constrict the space available for Mr. Biden. But on the other hand, I think large portions of the planet, of the world, whether it's in Europe or in Asia, have essentially felt a kind of lifting, as it were, of a certain atmosphere, of a certain, sense of skepticism about America's role in the world. I think that was beginning to show everywhere where the Trump administration was concerned. I think that in that sense, the world is probably looking forward to a more sober, to a more balanced world view as far as the Biden administration is concerned.
More balanced view, Surya. Again, we've already seen movement on that. The Biden administration will try and rebuild partnerships that have been hurt, especially, say, in Europe or in Southeast Asia. Right? You're seeing some of those pictures there from the inaugural ceremonies. But your views on how foreign policy, one of the prime objectives would possibly be to get the allies back on track with the US?
I think from what we have read and what we understand, Biden is a more institutional guy. He will seek to bring in allies and partners, exchange, converse with them more, not try and alienate them. He'll probably need to rebuild that front that America was known for in all these years. And frankly, it's also a fact that China is too big now to be tackled alone. There needs to be a broader front to take on China. So in that sense, perhaps Biden will move forward very institutionally, taking his allies along with him.
In fact, that's exactly what I asked Rick Rossow as well, what he thought on the Biden administration and US allies.
Well, I think at the end of the day, they will spend more time rebuilding partnerships. I think around the world, a lot of our partners, they did like to see the more confrontational approach. But at the same time, we did it very much kind of unilaterally, rather than, there are areas where we could probably do more partnership. Probably, looking at 5G was one of the very rare areas where we actually tried to pull together other nations to follow our lead. But in other matters, you think about what the United States did with China on trade matters. You think about the steps that we took in trying to block certain technology partnerships. A lot of that was done unilaterally. Meanwhile, if you think of India, Japan, a lot of our other partners, India has taken its own unilateral steps in blocking Chinese technology partnership investments and collaborations. I think on trade, India has been taking a lot of protectionist steps on trade because of concerns about this huge deficit the nation has with China. So there's actually a lot of overlap, which if we were engaging our partners, I think, more collaboratively rather than all of us taking unilateral actions, there's more of an impact we can have. So I don't suspect the avenues of concern, the steps that we take are going to be necessarily so very different, but hopefully we'll do it more collaboratively in areas where there's overlap with friends like India.
And Surya, again, when you're talking about technology and high tech, and especially in the defense areas, we've progressed a lot on the US front. But there's also another worry when you talk about the deal with the Russians and the S-400, the air defense system there, and what the Biden administration, will there be continuity in terms of what the Trump administration did on CATSA?
I think the Trump administration knew that they didn't have a comparable system to offer India. And in that sense, it was a practical decision they took to give us a waiver. Whether Biden will do it, well, I presume hopefully the same common sense will apply. And he will give us the waiver so we can go ahead and in any case, I don't think India is going to stop buying that weapon. It's something that has been ordered. The men who are going to train on it have already left for Russia. This is something that will happen. So it makes sense for the Americans to look at the practical side of things and just allow us to go ahead.
Rick Rossow, in fact, is quite pessimistic on sanctions not being imposed. He said that the Biden administration is likely to do that unless there's a widening of the waiver.
Right now, we're in a pretty dangerous place. I think, luckily, even though we knew that this was heading in our direction for quite some time, it has not lowered ambitions. So if you've seen the 2+2 dialogues that have taken place, our military engagements of late, there's no indication whatsoever that either side has started to kind of downplay expectations, knowing that we have this huge hurdle we have to figure out a way to overcome if in fact we choose to. So the good news is that it hasn't dampened things quite yet. But during the Biden administration is likely when a decision is going to have to be made. There is a waiver authority in the current CATSA legislation, Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. It's very narrow. I think there's a lot of debate about whether or not there's space to allow India through. The fact that we did go ahead and sanction a NATO treaty ally, Turkey, I think we can argue certainly that the relationship with Turkey is heading in a very different direction than the relationship with India. India is becoming a lot more positive, where there's a lot more distance between the United States and Turkey of late. But still, they are a treaty ally. How do you sanction a treaty ally and not sanction a friend and a partner? We don't yet know, I think, the positions that a lot of senior Biden administration officials are going to take. We saw initially during the Trump administration, that move to expand the waiver authority somewhat. And privately, it was conveyed that a large part of that reason was for India's benefit. But even after it was expanded somewhat, still many senior officials in the Trump administration, they weren't sure that it was wide enough. So I think we're in a dangerous place right now. And I think good odds are that we're going to end up in a bad place on this unless we, end this game of chicken and the United States decides to go back and further widen the waiver authority. Without a widening, I don't think there's a lot of space for India to pass through.
We'll be in a bad place, Rick Rossow feels, if there's not a widening of the waivers. But things are going to settle down now because as we started off the show, we talked about how the administration will be concentrating on of course, COVID, the fallout, the vaccine, the economy, jobs, and it's not mutually exclusive. It'll still be dealing with foreign policy, but at least we won't have to wake up every morning and have to deal with you on the editorial con call saying, what did Trump say today? And we have to do a quick story on that, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully Biden doesn't see the very Twitter kind of guy. He seems more, in that sense, solid, And there are issues, but then we are mature democracies. There will be irritants, there will be obstacles. These have to be overcome through dialogue. And I think on both sides, there is sufficient room for adjustment and compromise. It'll probably go through with a little, perhaps, to and fro going on. But my guess is things will work out.
Things will work out. Surya Gangadharan, StratNews Global Editor, thanks so much. We also thank all those of you who have taken the time out to watch this show or comment. You can, of course, go onto our website to support our kind of journalism. Do also follow our social media handles on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. And a big shout out to the entire StratNews Global production and editorial team for a little different show that we tried out this time. Thanks so much to everybody, and good night.
This is Democracy's Day. I will be a president for all Americans, all Americans. We must end this uncivil war. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example.